In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on January 23rd, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released, so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. St. Louis walks into the Riley Center like the student who keeps acing exams and now gets to show off in the toughest classroom on campus. They are on a long heater, stacking win after win, and it is not just the record that makes them look dangerous, it is how comfortable they have looked doing it. Most of their victories have not been nail-biters. They have been the kind of games where you glance up at the scoreboard and realize the gap has quietly stretched into double digits. That sort of pattern matters when you talk about a favorite trying to cover, because it tells you this is a group that does not mind pressing its edge and widening margins late instead of easing off the gas. On top of that, this attack travels really well, with an offense that lives in the low 90s in scoring, shoots with real confidence, and cleans the glass strongly enough that one good defensive stand can quickly turn into a run the other way. Here is the thing, the way St. Louis plays gives them more than one script for this matchup. If the game opens up and turns into a running contest, they have the depth and spacing to stay comfortable while the pace climbs. If it slows into more of a half-court grind, they still have the physicality and rebounding edge to squeeze out extra possessions and second chances. There is a quiet reliability in that, like knowing your car can handle both the motorway and a muddy country lane. On the other side, St. Bonaventure feels more volatile coming in. The Bonnies have had flashes that remind you why this building has a reputation as a nasty place for visitors, especially on a loud night, but their conference form has been wobbly, with that stretch of losses before finally grabbing a much-needed win over Loyola Chicago. They play with emotion, and the Riley Center crowd can absolutely give them a lift, yet their margin for error has been thinner, with those stretches where the offense stalls or a defensive lapse turns one bad possession into 3 or 4 in a row. That is the stuff that does not seem huge in one box score, but when you are taking points or laying them, it is exactly what bettors worry about. There is also the question of depth and health, which quietly lurks behind the headline numbers. St. Louis comes in a relatively stable place at the top of the rotation, with their main pieces available and only a long-term forward already written off for the year, while Bonaventure has had their bench chipped away by injuries to role guys who have barely factored in recent weeks. Over 40 minutes against a very physical, very confident opponent, that shorter usable bench can start to feel heavy, especially if foul trouble joins the party. And that is where the spread sitting in that uncomfortable mid to high single-digit neighborhood suddenly starts to look a little more manageable for the favorite than for the underdog that has to play almost perfectly just to keep the number honest. As our first pick for this matchup, the St. Louis Billikens to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Odds makers have slapped a number in the high 150s on this game, the kind of total that makes casual fans blink for a second. But when you look at how these two teams usually live, it is not pulled from thin air. St. Louis games already hover right around that neighborhood, with their attack living around 91 points and their defense giving up somewhere in the high 60s. That combination gives you a natural launchpad for bigger totals, because every missed shot can become an early clock push and every rebound can turn into 3 points the other way. St. Bonaventure, for their part, is not exactly dragging games into the mud either. Their scoring profile sits around the high 70s, and if you scroll back through their recent results, the scores read like a late-night scoreboard crawl, with numbers in the 80s on both sides more often than not. Those 80-plus to 70-plus type finals are not accidents. They reflect how both their offense and defense are shaped right now. Defensively, they allow enough clean looks that opponents can get rolling, and offensively, they have the guards and spacing to keep answering, which is a fun mix if you are holding an over ticket and maybe a bit stressful if you are coaching. Let me explain why the trends back that up a bit more. St. Louis has leaned slightly toward higher totals across their schedule, which makes sense when you remember their tempo and scoring punch. The Bonnies have been even more extreme, turning into one of those teams that quietly shows up near the top of over leaderboards, with the majority of their games, and especially a big chunk of recent ones, soaring past the projected number. That is not a guarantee of anything tonight. Of course, it is more like a hint about the kind of game they are repeatedly dragged into. Stylistically, this matchup almost invites extra points. St. Louis wants to run off both misses and makes, trusting their conditioning, depth, and shooting to win in open space. St. Bonaventure, especially at home, is better off leaning into that flow, letting their guards attack downhill and using the crowd noise as fuel instead of trying to slow things into a half-court slugfest that might actually help the visitors. Throw in offensive rebounding on both sides, guards who are not shy about getting into the paint and drawing whistles, and the very real possibility of a foul and free throw parade if St. Louis leads late and Bonaventure plays the clock, and you have a setup where a total in the high 150s can be threatened without anything wild or fluky. It does not mean we are guaranteed a track meet. Totals are always just projections painted in pencil, not ink. But when you add up the way these teams score, the way they defend, and the way they have been trending, it is not hard to picture a scoreboard that creeps into the 160s. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. They are repeatedly dragged into Indiana versus Rutgers. Friday night at 6 p.m. Eastern, Indiana walks into Jersey Mike's arena with the shiny new offense, the new coach, the transfer firepower, the whole "we fixed everything" storyline, and yet they still carry an 0-4 mark in true road games and a 4-game slide in Big Ten play. It sounds harsh, but that is the reality they bring into a packed, noisy gym in New Jersey. Rutgers, meanwhile, sits at 9-10 overall and 2-6 in the league, which looks pretty rough on the surface, until you remember how front-loaded their slate has been and how much more comfortable they have looked in this building than anywhere else. They have already knocked off Oregon, survived Northwestern in an overtime thriller, and handled Delaware State, UNLV, Rider, Maine, and Lehigh at home. And even in the losses here, they have made ranked opponents actually work for it instead of just rolling through. That is very on brand for this place, by the way, because small on-campus arenas with tight sight lines and a student section breathing down your neck can turn even a better team into a little bundle of nerves. Indiana's overall profile still pops when you glance at it. Roughly 81 points per game, almost plus 11 in average margin, one of the cleaner shooting resumes in the country, and a modern style that wants space, tempo, and early clock threes rather than grinding out mid-range jumpers. That has turned into a rainstorm of triples, around 10 made threes on nearly 30 attempts a night, with Lamar Wilkerson, Tucker DeVries, and Tate Conaway all sitting comfortably in double figures and basically leading the way in scoring, rebounding, and playmaking. It looks like something you would draw up in a coaching clinic. The catch, and it is a big one, is that this whole approach leans hard on rhythm and confidence, and both have been missing once they leave home. Those last 4 league games have all gone in the loss column, and every true road trip so far, Michigan, Michigan State, Kentucky, Minnesota, has ended with Indiana walking out frustrated. Anyone who has watched college hoops for a while knows that once a team starts thinking about road struggles, it can snowball, even if the talent is real. Rutgers tells almost the opposite kind of story. 10 new scholarship players, 7 freshmen, only 4 returners, so the roster has basically had to learn each other on the fly like a pickup team that slowly becomes an actual group. Early on it looked messy, and honestly that was expected. But the identity that is starting to settle in now feels very familiar for this program. Physical, stubborn, and more than happy to drag opponents into a long, exhausting fight where every cut and screen leaves a bruise. Their offense is still clearly a work in progress. They sit at about 70.3 points per game with sub-46% effective field goal shooting and low assist totals, which tells you this is not some flowing ball movement clinic. Still, they rebound, they get to the line in spurts, and now they have a real go-to-bucket getter in Tariq Francis, with Emmanuel Ogbole taking care of the glass and J. Michael Davis running the show as the main organizer. All 3 are firmly on the current roster, active, and right in the middle of the recent bright spots. Francis dropping 30 on Oregon and 30 again in that Northwestern overtime win. Grant stacking a double-double against Delaware State, and Davis leading them in assists and tempo. If you care about who actually shows up when it matters, that recent stretch pops a bit. Layer on top the fact that Rutgers is leaning into this home court edge at Jersey Mike's in a big way. The listings literally show this as versus Indiana in Piscataway, and their own notes keep hammering the crowd and the freshness of the roster as key storylines, and you end up in a spot where the market needs Indiana as about a 7.5-point road favorite just to keep the tickets balanced. On paper, sure, Indiana grades out better. On a neutral floor, the numbers probably justify something in that neighborhood. But this is not a neutral spreadsheet exercise. It is a compact 8,000-seat arena where Rutgers has already shown they can swing above their record, and where Indiana has not yet proven they can bring those glossy shooting splits with them out of town. When you then consider Indiana's still short rotation, with several portal additions plus a few injured transfers like Jason Drake and Josh Harris sitting on the roster without logged stats this year and Jordan Rayford listed out for the season, and you line that up with Rutgers' habit of stretching games into long, ugly, late clock possessions, the underdog starts to feel a lot more alive than the brand names and standings alone would suggest. So in a matchup where Indiana's reputation is still boosted by those early blowouts and record-setting three-point nights, while Rutgers is priced like the scrappy, anonymous middle-of-the-pack group they were supposed to be, it makes plenty of sense to lean toward the home dog, the heavier defense, and the team that actually enjoys this environment instead of the one dragging a month of road issues behind it, with the clear reminder that any call about how tonight unfolds on the court is still speculative, built on current numbers and recent form, not on any kind of guarantee. As our first pick for this matchup, the Rutgers Scarlet Knights to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Odds makers are hanging the total in this one in the high 140s, roughly 147.5 as a broad consensus, which is basically a bet that Indiana manages to pull Rutgers into an up and down, whistle-heavy game that looks a lot more like an Indiana home track meet than a grindy Big Ten night in Piscataway. That total assumes a lot. To land there, you need Indiana's 81.1 points per game offense to stay fully powered, and you also need Rutgers' roughly 70-point attack to punch a bit above its usual level against a defense that has quietly been very solid, allowing just under 70 points a night with top 25 type marks in effective field goal defense and 2-point percentage allowed. The Hoosiers are more than capable of filling it up. They regularly hit double-digit made threes, live in the mid-30s from deep, and knock down free throws at around 78%, so every foul can feel like a mini run waiting to happen. You blink, and suddenly the scoreboard has jumped. Rutgers, on the other side of that equation, has a profile that basically yells, "Slow this thing down." They score just 70.3 a game, give up around 74, and the shooting splits are rough, sub 46% effective field goal rate and around 31 to 32% from three, with one main creator and a lot of trips that end in late clock drives or contested mid-range looks. It is not pretty, but it can be effective if you are trying to keep games in a certain scoring window. When Rutgers has looked its best, the pattern is pretty clear. In that Northwestern overtime win, the grind against Delaware State, even the close loss to Ohio State, the games lived in the low 70s instead of exploding into the 80s. Indiana, for all the offensive juice and shooting talk, has already shown on this recent losing streak that when opponents slow those early clock threes and force half-court possessions, their scoring can slide down into the low 70s too. Now mix in the situational angle. This is Indiana's fifth true road game. The previous four all went the wrong way for them, and they come in with simple pressure to get a win rather than to put on some sort of showy scoring clinic. Rutgers is coming off two high-paced road games at Wisconsin and Iowa that really exposed some transition defense issues, so Steve Pickiel has every reason to hit the brakes, keep the ball in Francis's hands more often, and lean into that half-court physical style that chews up clock. Neither side feels an urgent need to run wild with 7 new Big Ten scouting reports sitting on desks and officials who are not shy about their whistles. It also matters that both rosters are basically intact for this matchup. The key creators we have talked about are active and have been playing real minutes lately, while Indiana's remaining injury concerns sit mostly with guys who have not seen the floor yet this season and one player who is firmly ruled out long-term. So we are not really expecting some surprise bench flamethrower to stroll in and twist the pace in a new direction, and that expectation about rotations and usage is still a projection based on how these coaches have handled things so far, not a fixed script. If Indiana gets rolling in transition, knocks down something like 14 threes, and turns this into another December-style fireworks show, then sure, the total can absolutely race past the number. But when you stack Rutgers' clunky but stubborn offense, their likely plan to slow the game down, Indiana's recent scoring regression away from home, and the usual Big Ten pattern of whistle-filled, grinding possessions, you end up leaning toward a scoring outcome that lands closer to the mid-130s than the high 140s more often than not, while still openly admitting that any prediction about pace and shot-making is uncertain by nature. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Marquette versus Butler. Let's set the scene first. Friday night at Hinkle Fieldhouse, national television cameras on FS1, and you have one program trying to climb the Big East ladder while the other is just trying to prove this season still matters. Butler comes in sitting at 12-7 overall, 3-5 in league play, and a very real 8-3 at home, which is not elite, but it is the kind of record that tells you they are usually comfortable in their own gym. Marquette shows up at 7-13, 2-7 in conference games, and still chasing that first road win after going 0-6 away from Milwaukee. You do not need a spreadsheet to feel what that means. One side has a building it trusts, the other is still living out of a suitcase emotionally. From the spread angle, that is where the story starts to tighten up. Odds makers are hanging a number in that 6.5 to 7 point area with Butler laying the points and Marquette taking them as the road underdog. And that kind of range tells you books respect the home edge without calling this a total mismatch. Here is the thing, Butler's whole identity this season looks like a grown group that knows how it wants to score, not a bunch of kids just chucking up early threes because the shot clock is a suggestion. They are putting up around 83 points a night with real efficiency, and the offense flows through a guard and wing combination that can both create and finish, which lets them run actual sets instead of playing pickup on hardwood in front of 10,000 people. That kind of structure matters for the spread because teams that know where the ball should go usually know how to put a game away late rather than turning a 7-point lead into a 2-point sweat. Even the bad news around Butler has kind of sharpened their picture rather than broken it. Losing Jalen Jackson to a season-ending ankle injury is not a small thing. It trims the rotation and takes away a body, but it has also forced the remaining group to lock in on their roles. You saw that in the 87-80 win over DePaul earlier in the week, where they did not play perfect basketball, but they played composed basketball in key stretches at home. That is the type of performance bettors remember more than the highlight dunk, because it tells you whether a team can actually handle being the one expected to win by a margin. On the flip side, Marquette is coming off that wild 105-104 overtime win against Providence, the kind of game that looks fun on YouTube clips but quietly drains the legs, especially when you are about to hit the road again. They scored in bunches, but they also gave up basically everything, and that has been the theme. Season long, they are allowing close to 79 points per game, sitting way down in the national defensive rankings and struggling to finish possessions on the glass. When you keep giving opponents extra chances, it is not just bad for your win-loss record, it is deadly when you are supposed to stay inside a number on the road. The market has picked up on that. Marquette has been rough against the spread, sitting around 5-15 overall against the number and only about 1-3 when catching this type of bigger underdog spread. Butler, by contrast, has been much more trustworthy for bettors, close to 11-8 against the spread on the season, with something like 5-1 when laying roughly a touchdown or more and around 6-5 against the number at home with this core. Those are not magic, but they do paint a picture of one team that generally lives up to expectations, and another that keeps letting tickets burn. There is also the question of what kind of bench you really get from Marquette right now. Their backcourt depth has been in flux. Guard Sean Jones has missed multiple games in a row with a foot issue and has been listed as out recently, and that uncertainty matters when you are relying on quick guards to handle pressure in a loud building for 40 minutes. Honestly, if you have ever backed a thin road team in a hostile gym, you know that feeling when the legs go a bit with 8 minutes left and every possession starts to look like a hill. Hinkle gets loud when Butler stacks stops, and in a spread context, that kind of environment often pushes a game from tight but manageable to this is getting away from the dog very quickly. So if you pull it all together, the home scoring reliability, the stronger track record against the number, the healthier and more settled rotation, and the road and defensive issues Marquette keeps dragging around, it creates a pretty clear picture of which side is more likely to take control of the margin by the final horn. As our first pick for this matchup, the Butler Bulldogs to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Books are hanging a projected number around 160.5, which is not shy at all, even for a Big East game where scoring runs come in waves. On paper, you can see why. Take Butler's roughly 83 points per game, mix that with Marquette living in the mid-70s on offense, and you land in the neighborhood of 159 combined. That is close enough that the total feels like the house nudging you slightly higher and asking, are you sure you want to go over this? The recent results do give the overcrowd something to point at. Butler games have gone above this sort of number multiple times, and Marquette contests have done it a handful of times as well, especially in that 100-plus point thriller against Providence. If you just scroll through box scores on your phone, it is easy to think, well, here we go again, another track meet. But games are not played inside stat sheets, and that is where the texture starts to matter a bit more. Think about how this particular matchup is likely to feel possession to possession. One side has an offense that is comfortable running half-court actions, getting into sets, and forcing the defense to guard for the full clock. That usually leads to more deliberate trips rather than pure run and gun. The other side can score in spurts, but their defensive issues and the emotional swing from that overtime win suggest there may be more choppy stretches than the last box score would make you think. When you put a tired or inconsistent defense on the floor against a team that is happy to work for a good look, you often get longer possessions, more fouls, and a rhythm that does not always favor a 90-point fireworks show from either locker room. There is also a subtle pacing quirk that bettors know well. Games with a relatively high total can still play under when the scoreboard pressure shifts. If one team builds a cushion in the second half, coaches frequently tap the brakes, call more sets, and let the clock become their best friend. You have seen it 1,000 times. Fans want 30 seconds of chaos, but the staff on the sideline wants clean, low-risk possessions. That style is not exactly friendly to an over-ticket that needs wave after wave of transition buckets. Defensively, even with all the criticism, the combined picture is not quite as wild as the headline final scores suggest. Together, these teams are allowing somewhere around 155 points per game, which sits nearly 6 points below that 160.5 number that is hanging. So you do not actually need a rock fight like 58-52 for an under to come through. Something like an 82-74 type finish, which still feels like a pretty entertaining game if you are watching at home, would land under that total. When you factor in how conference officiating tends to tighten up as games grind, especially in league play where everyone knows each other's sets, plus the natural human instinct for a team with a lead to slow things down late, the path to a result that comes in a little below the posted number looks very realistic. The matchup, the likely game flow, and the recent emotional swing for one of these offenses all point more toward a solid scoring night that falls just shy of the fireworks level total that is on the board. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Ohio State versus Michigan. Rivalry games like this always feel a little different, but this one in Ann Arbor has a very clear shape on paper. You have Michigan sitting at 17-1 overall and 7-1 in league play, playing at home where they are 8-1 and carrying the label of heavy favorite for a reason. Ohio State walks in at 13-5 and 5-3 in conference, which is solid, but the gap in profile is real, and the spread sitting in that 15 to 16 point range tells you the market sees it too. Michigan is not that old slow grind version of the Big Ten that used to win games 62-58. This group plays like it actually enjoys turning the scoreboard into a stress test. You see that in the way they have stacked blowout wins, like hammering Auburn, blasting McNeese, running Gonzaga off the floor, dropping 101 on Rutgers, and then handling Indiana in a controlled way that still never really felt close. Those are not random explosions, they are patterns from a team that can turn a normal game into a runaway when they smell weakness. A big part of that is how many different ways Michigan can attack. The front line with Morris Johnson Jr., Ade Mara, and Yaxel Lendeborg gives them size and athleticism that most opponents just do not match over 40 minutes. You layer Elliot Cadeau running the show, Nimari Burnett as a steady two-way presence, and Trey McKinney coming in as instant offense, and suddenly the rotation looks like it can survive foul trouble and still keep pressure on both ends. The important detail here is that those key names are active and rolling, not limping in. They have already shown that even when guys pick up early fouls or take a knock, there is another weapon ready, which is a luxury in a long, physical rivalry game. Ohio State, to be fair, has a starting group that can punch back. Bruce Thornton, John Mobley Jr., Devin Royal, Christoph Tilley, and Amari Bynum form a starting five that can all score, and they are used to having to carry that load. On a good night, that group can absolutely hang for long stretches and make runs that quiet a road crowd for a bit. The problem is not the top of the rotation, it is what comes after. Once you move past those five, the cracks show up. Brandon Knoll is out with a foot issue, Josh Ojianwuna is out with a knee problem, and Miles Harrow is redshirting, so the Buckeyes are missing important size and support pieces even though they are still technically on the roster. That means the remaining bigs and wings have to shoulder extra minutes and extra responsibility in one of the most hostile environments they will see. It is one thing to hold up like that at home or in a softer spot. It is a different story when you have to bang with multiple Michigan bigs for an entire night. Fatigue and foul trouble start to matter a lot in a setup like this. Ohio State just had to grind through an overtime game with Minnesota, which is not exactly what you want in the legs heading into a game where the opponent can constantly send fresh size and length at you. If those Buckeye starters have to play extended minutes again and any of the front court pieces pick up early fouls, the matchup tilts even more toward that familiar picture, Michigan slowly stretching a single-digit lead into something that looks very comfortable on the scoreboard. Now, big spreads are always a little scary. Michigan has had nights where they win easily but miss covering by a bucket or two, and that sticks in your memory because bettors feel those results. Even so, when you step back and look at how this specific matchup lines up, more depth, more size, a healthier core, and a home environment where Michigan has already bullied good teams, it leans toward another game where the stronger roster can separate late rather than hang on. As our first pick for this matchup, the Michigan Wolverines to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The total tells a completely different story, and honestly, it is a fun one. Books hanging a number in that low 160s range are basically saying, we expect a track meet, and we are not shy about it. That might sound aggressive at first, but when you look at how these two teams score, it starts to feel pretty logical. Michigan is putting up 92.7 points per game while giving up about 69, which is wild for a team with this kind of size. They have turned several games into pure scoring festivals, like dropping 121 on Oakland, 102 on LaSalle, 112 on McNeese, 101 on Gonzaga, 96 on USC, and that 101 spot on Rutgers. Those are not inflated by one weird overtime outlier. They are part of a season-long profile where this offense lives in the 80s, 90s, and sometimes right past the triple-digit line. It is not just jump shooting either. Michigan has been pounding teams in the paint, racking up around 40-plus points near the rim on average, which means even if perimeter shots go cold for a stretch, they have an easy, repeatable way to keep scoring. That combination of interior pressure and perimeter skill usually forces opponents to pick their poison. Either you tag the shooters and give up layups and post touches, or you pack the paint and trust that their shooters go cold. Most defenses wobble somewhere in the middle, and that is when the scoreboard starts racing. Ohio State brings plenty of offense to the table as well. They are scoring in the low 80s per game, which is no joke, and their main guards are very comfortable turning games into my turn, your turn, scoring stretches. Bruce Thornton can control tempo and get to the free throw line. John Mobley Jr. can fill it up in bunches from the perimeter, and the rest of the starting five chips in enough that you cannot just sell out on one guy without giving something up elsewhere. When a team like that is pushed, they tend to respond by trying to score their way back into rhythm rather than slowing things down. Here is the thing, when you put a high-powered attack like Michigan's in the same gym as an Ohio State team that likes to run its guards and is used to playing with offensive responsibility, you usually do not get a slow, careful chess match. You get long stretches of quick shots, early offense, and possessions where both sides are hunting mismatches instead of milking clock. Even short scoring droughts get erased quickly because one or two made threes or a quick 8-point run flips the feel of the game right back. There is also the quiet influence of late-game scoring. In big college totals, people often forget how much the last 4 minutes matter. If the game lands in that classic range where one side is chasing, you tend to see intentional fouls, quick possessions, and free throws stacking up on the scoreboard. Every whistle adds another point or two, and those extra possessions are exactly what pushes a total from this might come up short into wow, that cleared by a few baskets. None of this guarantees that the number gets crushed, of course. Sometimes shots rim out, sometimes a coach slows things down, and sometimes nerves tighten in rivalry spots. But when you blend Michigan's extreme scoring profile, their history of turning games into high-scoring showcases, Ohio State's own offensive comfort, and the likelihood of plenty of possessions with both teams trying to answer each other, the picture you get looks much more like a game that wants to play on the higher side of the total rather than sneak under quietly. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Utah State versus Colorado State. We have Utah State walking into a striped-out Moby Arena with all the drama you would expect from a late January conference matchup. Revenge humming in the background after that lopsided beating Colorado State took in Logan not that long ago. Colorado State has a first-year head coach trying to plant his identity. Utah State is trying to settle back into a groove after dropping 2 of its last 3, and the whole thing feels a little bit like a league game that has turned personal. Honestly, those are the nights that make college hoops feel more like a long-running series than just another line on the schedule. On paper, it looks like the classic home underdog in a big emotional spot story, but the market has not exactly rushed to crown the Rams here. Utah State sits at 15-3 overall and 6-2 in the Mountain West, right on the heels of San Diego State in the league race, while Colorado State sits at 12-7 with a 3-5 conference mark that tells a much choppier story. Utah State's overall profile this season is loud, putting up around 84.8 points per game on better than 51% shooting from the field and winning by roughly 16 points a night, which is not just winning, it is stepping on people a bit. Here is the thing, they have carried that edge out on the road too. They walked into Air Force and turned it into a 99-62 kind of night, then followed that with a 93-68 win at Boise State, which is not what you normally see from a team that is supposed to be fragile away from home. Colorado State, on the other hand, has been more of a roller coaster, dangerous at home for sure, but still sitting 3-5 in league play and 2-3 over its last 5 games, even with that recent 81-52 smackdown of Air Force at Moby. Both teams are listed with no injuries to report on the latest matchup information, so we are expecting full rotations on both sides unless there is a very late surprise that nobody sees coming. Coaching adds another layer to the story, with Utah State enjoying a bit of continuity in year 2 under Jared Calhoun, while Colorado State is still working through the natural growing pains of Ali Farouk-Manesh's first season in charge. In tight, emotional conference games, that extra year of shared language and expectations can matter, even if it is hard to pin it to a single stat. Oddsmakers still have Utah State as a short road favorite by roughly a 2-possession margin, which basically says that even if you strip away the crowd and the paint on the court, the Aggies are still graded as the better team on a neutral floor. You are talking about an offense that has already shown it can blow this exact opponent off the floor, paired with a defense that quietly holds teams under 70 on average, and a group that has already treated some tough road gyms like they were just another practice run. Yes, Colorado State has actually been the better team for bettors so far, sitting at something like 11-7 against the spread compared with Utah State around 8-9, which is a big reason this number has not ballooned into a full 3-possession tax. But that success is also now baked into the price, and in a revenge game where the talent, the efficiency, and the depth still lean toward the Aggies while both rosters appear fully intact, we are comfortable letting the home court emotion live in the pregame ceremony and trusting the more stable, higher-ceiling group once the ball actually goes up, with the clear reminder that this is a projection based on current data, not a promise or financial advice. As our first pick for this matchup, the Utah State Aggies to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Now shifting to the total, this is where things get a little playful because the books are basically daring you to look at Utah State scoring about 84.8 points per game and Colorado State sitting in the high 70s. Add those in your head, see a number in the 160s, and feel like a total posted near 148.5 is asking to be challenged. That first meeting in Logan, the one that finished 100-58, did nothing to calm that instinct, since it sailed past this same neighborhood of a number without breaking a sweat and made the box score look like it came out of a video game. Let me explain why that is a bit of a trap, or at least why it needs a second look. That game was a blowout from very early on, and blowouts break the usual rules. One side got rolling, the other side never really found its footing, and what you end up with is a pace and shot profile that does not translate cleanly into a normal rematch. Now you flip the setting, Colorado State is at home, the crowd is striped, there is some pride on the line after getting embarrassed, and that usually produces a more locked-in defensive effort rather than a second straight track meet for the cameras. That idea is, of course, speculative, but it is rooted in how conference teams usually respond the second time around when the first game turned lopsided. Both defenses are better than a casual glance at the raw scoring numbers might suggest. Utah State holds opponents under roughly 69 points per night. Colorado State sits around 71 allowed, and when you peel away the blowout noise, you start to see totals that are much more grounded. That recent Utah State game against Nevada that finished 71-62 landed at a combined 133 points, well below the number being hung for this matchup, and it showed how the Aggies can still control a game while keeping the scoreboard within a more modest range. On the Rams side, that 81-52 win over Air Force also settled at 133 points, which is another reminder that when they are the ones dictating terms at Moby, things do not always turn into a full fireworks show. With both sides healthy, rotations intact, and real stakes in the Mountain West race, this sets up less like a loose exhibition and more like a possession-by-possession contest where neither team wants to be the one that cracks first on the defensive end. That does not mean we are suddenly looking at a 58-56 rock fight, because these offenses are too efficient and too confident for that kind of grind, especially with the emotion that will be in the building. It does suggest that a few longer half-court trips, some early jitters that lead to missed shots, and tighter defense after halftime can shave just enough off the scoring pace to bring the total in under a number that has been inflated all season by how often Utah State has blown people out. Again, this is a forecast based on current season stats and matchup context, not a claim that we know the exact final score before the ball is even tipped. So we keep circling back to a game that still feels entertaining and high level, but one that lands in the low to mid 140s more often than it races into the 150s on most realistic scripts. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.